Well, as I told somebody recently, I got here because my mother got pregnant, but actually I became aware of old guns, new guns, and so forth probably about the end of the Second World War, when I was, I don't know, 8 years old or so, and born in 1937. And of course, that was the start of the Western TV movies on black and white television, the little bitty screens. And that influenced a lot of us that age with cap pistols and so forth and guns. And I sort of pursued that. I had a couple of uncles that used to take me hunting and bird hunting out in West Texas, Nolan County. And I guess I got my first old gun about 1951. I paid $14.95 for it to some guy named Martin B. Retting up in New Jersey. It was a trapdoor cut down Army musket, trapdoor Springfield, been cut down to look like a carbine. And for that price, I got it delivered for probably $1.50 or something in the mail, and plus a box of surplus ammunition, 500 grain bullets, smokeless powder, which was not what you wanted to shoot in that thing. It was made for black powder, and anyway, I managed not to blow myself up, but it did kick pretty strongly. But I had that one, and I had a .22 rifle, in which I modified. The firing pin broke on it. It was an automatic. The firing pin broke on it, and I took it downtown and found a guy who could weld, and he welded it together, which made it a little bit longer than it was supposed to be. So the first time I loaded a magazine with 6 or 7 .22 bullets in it, and flipped the release for the thing to fly forward and chambered the first round, it not only chambered it, but it fired the first round because of the extra long firing pin. And all of a sudden I had a machine gun, which was not really the thing to do, even back then. But I played with it for 3 or 4 months till I blew the chamber out of it, and I think it moved it on, traded for something else. But anyway, I went from there, and I used to go hunting with my uncles in Sweetwater, Texas, Nolan County, on September 1st, Uncle J.D. and Uncle Grady. And they took me along just so they could shoot into my bird limit, because I wasn't any good. I didn't have a shotgun. I had to borrow one that was a goose gun with 30-inch barrel, 12-inch, a 12 gauge shotgun. It was so worn out if you cocked it, if you had it loaded and cocked, if you put the butt of the gun down too hard on the ground, it would slip off the sear and it would fire. So you had to sort of watch it. But anyway, that went on for a while, and I began to pick up an extra gun here and there, an old gun of one kind or another that I'd seen on television. And they were pretty cheap back then. And I used to go over to a place in Dallas named Jackson Arms, Red and Elsie Jackson. I remember them on Knox Henderson, and before that on Lover's Lane, and later on Hillcrest. And she ended up there as the widow Jackson, and before she retired, and he'd long gone, Red Jackson. But I bought a lot of good guns there, and knew a lot of the early people in Texas, antique gun collecting. Anyway, I went to the Naval Academy, was out there for a while. I had a lady friend who was my first wife, and the mother of my older son, my oldest child, Lane, John Lane, who's now 67 come December. And she bought me a a current model of this single action Colt. More about this later, but this is an 1899 version. And Colt discontinued what they began here in 1873, back in 1940 roughly, with World War II. And in 1956, after the end of the war and the demand for these cowboy guns was strong, Colt began to produce them again. And Lane's mother bought me one for a present of this new production, 15 serial number 1557 SA, 7.5-inch barrel, 45 Colt. Wish I still had him. It'd be $4,000 now, probably $5,000. Anyway, so I went on in that genre for a while, shot black powder for a while with some friends. Was off in college, went home from college. Home now was where I made it in Arlington, and made some new friends. And, shot black powder with them. Had a Sharps rifle, 45-70. I had some single actions. Just generally had fun, got in trouble, stuff like that. And that more or less gets me into adulthood when I began to have a little more money. And I started going to the local gun shows and became a member of the Texas Gun Collectors Association back then. And met a guy named Jim Vulgaris, called him the old pirate. He was a close friend as well as a dealer relationship. We used to have to decide up front which hat we were wearing, whether it was the dealer client or the buddy hat. I spent many a weekend at his place in Mason, and then the next one down in Fredericksburg. Met his family, a good part of them, the ones that would speak to him. And he was sort of a mentor to me, and most of what I learned really came about in the 1980s when I was married to my third wife, Connie, and I began to have a pretty good collection. When we split the blanket, that bought out her interest. I had to get rid of a wonderful collection of small Colts, pocket model Colts I had, which Jim Vulgaris helped me get. But anyway, where did I come about this, and what little do I know? And I'm not advertising being an expert, I'll tell you that. What I've learned is looking at books, reading what I could find, and let Jim and some of his friends mentor me on details and such and so. And an occasional other dealer who I always, had one eye closed with that. And so what I know, and what I don't know, I don't. I don't have here from my friends on loan that I'll show you during what I'm going to do, responding to Jay's request. What I'm going to do is talk to you some about the ones that interest me of the Colt revolvers. The first thing I have to do, I think, is set a sort of a context for the thing. And I've been coon-fingering this flintlock here, which I bought it because it was manufactured in 1837, 100 years before I was born. And it was the last flintlock that the U.S. Armed Forces used, and it was considered the apogee of the design. It was single shot, like 54 caliber or 52, I forget which. And this is a pretty good example of it. This is a Waters. They made them from 1837 through about 1842 or 3. It was pretty good, and there was still some in use during the American Civil War. Many of them were converted to the next evolutionary method of firing, igniting the powder, which was what we call percussion, using a cap with fulminate of mercury, like a cap gun. So that pretty well introduces it with this. I'm going to let this one go aside. The next type of ignition of the gunpowder to fire the weapon was what we call the percussion type. And basically what you have in these little pistols in each of the 5 chambers in this gun, and you would put it in half cock to free up the cylinder. You would take your powder flask and you would put powder in each cylinder, measured by the size, the length of that little tube, black powder. And then you would take a round ball, 31 caliber, and put it over there, rotate it underneath the rammer, and hold the rammer down and ram that ball down in on top of the powder. And you do that for all 5 chambers. And then what you would do is go to your cap box, and in the cap box are these little nasty copper cups we call percussion caps. That nestled down in the cap is some fulminate of mercury. And if you strike those things, they will put out a little flame, go pow, and be a flame. And you put one of these on the end of each nipple. Pinch them a little bit so they won't fall off. And you're ready to go. It's sort of awkward. I mean, 5 shots and you're done if somebody's coming at you. But that's the way things happened until, about 1861. I'll get into that in a minute, but I want to finish with these. Colt was one of the first, you might say the only, who did interchangeable sharp parts, and he invented a revolver that worked. There were many inventions, but he did one that worked pretty well. This is their smallest moneymaker that Colt had, the pocket model, 1848 to roughly 73. This one, I got it borrowed to illustrate how delicate this grip is. This is brass, so each grip was a little bit different because the grips were put on there and sanded, and then they took them off and then silver plated this brass and put them back together. But this is serial number 320, probably the first month of production of the Colt pocket model. This is known as a baby dragoon without a rammer. But anyway, that's an early one. This one was made in 1856. It's engraved by one of the German engravers that were subcontracted to Colt. It was originally silver plated, had ivory grips, and was a real Civil War type of a pistol. And this is the original type of casing. Here's the bullet mold that you could cast 1 conical and 1 round ball, 31 caliber. And here is a little wrench to take the nipples off with to clean them. And that's pretty much what you get with the cap and ball Colts. They made, this is their small one, pocket model, their money maker. They made a Navy Colt, which was an intermediate size. And they made the Army size, which was a big one. And a little larger one called the Dragoon. Which, okay, these Colts were an outgrowth of the Walker model, which was itself an outgrowth of Colt's early experimental ones that were made at Paterson, New Jersey. And among those was a bunch, I think 150 or something, that were bought by the state of Texas for the Texas Navy and never used and issued to the Texas Rangers. And they were a long barrel, about this long, had no trigger guard. The trigger did not show up until you pull the hammer back, and then the trigger would fall down. Captain Jack Hayes of the Texas Rangers, if you wanted to call them that then, had an altercation with his people with some Comanches on Enchanted Rock area, just northwest of Fredericksburg. And the Comanche weren't used to a pistol that would fire 5 times at once. They were used to making a charge, and the Rangers would fire their single shots, and then while they were reloading, the Indians would come in and cut their throats, etc. Well, the Indians came in to cut their throats, and here was 4 more shots. So they were wiped out there. The problem with those early pistols, those early Colt Pattersons, which if you find a nice one today, you can end up paying probably $275,000 for it. And it's accessories for openers. Anyway, Captain Walker went back east and contacted Colt and said, you have a nice weapon here, but it's got lots of problems. And why don't we sit down and design one together that suits the Texas Rangers? And that's what they did. And what came out was the so-called, collectors call it the Walker model, after Sam Walker. He got to fire about 2 rounds with his first one before he was killed by the Mexicans in the Mexican War. But that thing weighed 4 pounds, 8.5 ounces unloaded. It was the .44 Magnum of the day, 44 caliber, 6-shot, 9-inch barrel. And it was a little too big. And given the poor steel and iron at the time of which they were made, they had a lot of cylinders explode and so forth. So Colt pretty quickly downsized that Walker a little bit into what became the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd model Dragoons, with some extras here and there that I won't go into, like the Whitneyville and so forth. And they were a little bit smaller. They were still 44 caliber. They were still heavy as heck. If you saw Lonesome Dove, Robert Duvall carried what was a replica Walker in that movie. But anyway, from the Dragoons, you had the 44 caliber Army model Colts, which were also percussion. Okay, we're going to continue, and I'm going to focus here for a little bit and talk just about Colts for a little bit, and maybe do some other stuff later if Jay wants to edit it in. Let's go back. I mentioned the Patterson Colt, and it evolved into this model, which is known to collectors as the Navy model. Both the Army and the Navy used it. Historical figures like Wild Bill Hickok used them in pairs and so forth. But anyway, this is called the Navy frame. This is sort of a middle-sized cap and ball Colt. It has the nipples, the whole thing, the rammer, all of that. This became obsolete by the end of the Civil War because fixed ammunition, where the bullet, the cartridge case, the primer, which in this case is hidden, it looks like a rimfire, but it is not, and the powders all together. This is fixed ammunition. And it was a big improvement over the cap and ball and the loose powder, because that could get wet. This wasn't quite as easy to get wet. Anyway, the Navy Colt evolved into this one known as the Army Colt, the 1860 model. They took this middle-sized frame of the Navy Colt and put a little bit larger cylinder on the front of it and converted it into a 44 caliber. And this is the 1860 Army Colt. Now it too was a cap and ball. This one is not. Which brings us to the next step in Colts. From about 1870 to about 1880, Colt used up all its spare parts they had left over from their cap and ball production. Well, they took the 1860 Army Colt and converted it to a 44 centerfire cartridge by putting a wafer in here, loading gate, took the nipples off, and bored the cylinder straight through. Now this is known as an Ainsworth Richards. It is a Richards style conversion, which has this plate, has a firing pin right there in that plate. And it is one of 1,200 of the old cap and ball that the Army used in the Civil War that were returned to Colt for conversion into 44 Colt caliber. And they're very scarce today. Most of them are heavy used. This one is in pretty good shape. A fella loaned it to me. If I don't get it back to him in good shape, he'll probably kill me. Anyway, but this is an Ainsworth Richards. Now this was issued to the cavalry. It didn't last long because Smith & Wesson was competing with them now. And that's a whole other thing. But Colt tried to make one further step. And that step did not last very long in production, just 2 years. Collectors call this an open top. You notice how it looks a whole lot like this Navy Colt, because it's the same size frame. And it looks a whole lot like this one, just not quite as bulky. But it too is a 44 caliber. The difference is, this is what they call a 44 rim fire. The firing pin strikes on the rim of the cartridge. And there's no primer in it. The primer is just around the rim on the inside of the case. This is known as an open top, and it was produced for only 2 years. Very scarce today. Most of them are nickel plated like this one because they were easier to keep. Most of them went to Mexico. And the reason they were produced in this caliber 44 rimfire is that was the caliber that the Henry rifle, the forerunner of the Winchester lever action with the brass frame and so forth. It was the Henry rifle that used the 44 rimfire. So here you had both a pistol and a carbine that would, and a rifle, if you had one, that would use the same cartridge. It wasn't very powerful, but a lot of those went to Mexico and further south, and they're used pretty hard. And it's hard to find a good one. Most of them have the barrels cut. This one, I think, has not had the barrel cut and restored. Many of them have had the barrel restored, and you have to really look closely at it. But anyway, this is an open top, and it only lasted. It was an interim gun, and probably a mistake in product line. But that's the open top. This quintessential cowboy gun, the 1873 model Colt, superseded the open top and the conversions, and it became very popular. They produced 300,000 something of them till they quit about 1940. And this one is serial number 2603. Now, collectors will tell you that when you're collecting these old guns, what you see is what you get. If it looks too good to be true, it is. It's a fake, etc., etc. And a lot of these old guns have stories that go with them. And those are stories that are fun to know. You don't know if they're true or not. But this one has a pretty good story. In 1950, a Texas collector in Austin bought this from a black family in Austin who had not fired it for years and years. They had it mounted on a wood plaque in their living room. And it was a family heirloom because their great-grandfather or whatever was alleged by them to be a Seminole Indian scout, part black, part Seminole Indian, from down at Fort Clark. And this allegedly was the pistol he carried. Who knows? It's in pretty good shape. The nickel plating was not too good in those days, and the black powder tended to, make it look at the cylinder on that, But this is serial number 2603. I'm happy to have it. It's certainly the first year of production, and it is not a military model. This is probably one of 200 or less that were made the first couple of years that were not marked U.S. on the frame there, and that were nickel plated instead of blued and case hardened, and that were issued to civilians. Like this Scout was probably he bought as a civilian if he in fact had it. But anyway, who knows if this is true? But it's a neat story, and I sort of like to keep it in mind. It had some problems when I got it, and I sent it down to Alan Harton in Houston, and he did a little bit of magic on it. I'm not going to tell you where it was. And then I got rid of it, traded it off to a good friend who loaned me it for this thing. These cartridges keep floating around in here. But anyway, that is the gun in its Ainsworth inspected version, blued, case hardened. It was the U.S. Cavalry and U.S. Army handgun until really the turn of the century, really around 1900. A few of them did service in the Philippines there at the last. And as I said, they made them until about 1940. But they made them in a whole variety of calibers. Here's another gun that has a pretty good story. It's an old beater, boat anchor we'd call it, of a single action Colt. It was made in 1882, I believe, from the factory letter that when I borrowed the gun. In 1916, Pancho Villa attacked across the New Mexican border to Columbus, New Mexico, and killed a bunch of people. And there was an army detachment there, the U.S. Army, and they pretty well massacred Villa's men. And the ones that got killed, the ones that didn't get away and ride back across the border to New Mexico, they piled them up and poured fuel on them and burned them up. But before they did, they tended to collect whatever guns they had. And the story is, this is one of those that belonged to one of the Pancho Villa's Dorados. Like I said, it's a single action Colt. It's 45 caliber. The barrel has been cut, nicely done, from 7.5 to 6 inches. The grips are pretty well worn, as is the nickel plate. There's hardly any left. But anyway, it was salvaged by some of the residents of Columbus, and it spent years in a local museum there, which finally deaccessioned it to some Texas collector. It ended up in Texas collector Johnny Bassett's collection, well-known collector. And then when he passed, it entered the collector's pipeline and so forth. And so here it is today. A friend was willing to loan it to me. It has a good story. Don't know if it's real or not, but it sure looks nice in this holster. It's maker marked. It's reproduction. This is an overrun from one of those Wyatt Earp movies, and it's marked Spangenberger, Tombstone, Arizona. But this was an overrun from some of the extras in one of those two movies, and it fits this holster. It fits this pistol and the holster matched together. I sort of like it. But that's pretty realistic looking. That's another 73 model Colt. One of my favorite calibers in the single action Colt, and Colt made them in double action also later, is called the 41 Colt. It's a strange cartridge. And I'd been hunting for one, and this is mine here. And I found this one. And I sent it off to Alan Harton, who made it pure again. He tightened it up. There's no in it, and it's smooth. Listen to that. And it's wonderful. Only problem is, it has a serial number below 192,000, which means really you better not shoot smokeless powder in it. So I'm going to have to go back and load some 41 Colt before I shoot it. A good friend of mine, the late John Cunningham of Clifton, Texas, made this holster for me, and look how it fits. Isn't that nice? That's a pure Texas holster with that one strap skirt on it there. He did a good job, Johnny Cunningham. He should be remembered. Now, these Colts are still made today on special order. The primary one, the top of their line, is known as the New Frontier. It has target sights. It's sort of a copy of the Ruger Super Blackhawk. This is a 45 made in the 1970s. It's never been fired. Has adjustable sights here, front versus elevation and windage. And beautiful blue, beautiful case hardening here, done by Turnbull. And 45 Colt. And it's pretty accurate for a gun. This model is. Anyway, but this is how the single action really ended up as far as Colt goes. Now, it was so popular, of course, that over the years, many other firms copied this single action design because there was a market for them. And probably one of the better, in my view, the best copy of this 1873 Colt is defunct now, U.S. Firearms. They made them originally in the old Colt factory at Hartford, and a guy had some money, and his goal, as I understand it, was to make a better product than Colt was making. For example, Colt, if they had a cutter that was cutting holes in the cylinder for chambers to put the stuff, they might use it to cut 2 or 3 cylinders. He might say, no, don't cut more than 1 cylinder with that cutter, because it'll be too dull and you'll get variations. They'll affect accuracy and so forth. So all of this stuff was not economically feasible. It never turned a profit. It ate up all of his money and went out of business. But this is one of the, I think, the best ones. It is a U.S. Firearms, which was purchased in the white as a box of parts, along with many others like it, by a rather famous gun restorer in New York State named Turnbull. He's famous for this case hardening process, that he really makes it flash. And he finished this and finished out the assembly of the gun and the polishing it and the tuning of it. It's sharp, and this pistol would probably be very accurate. But this is, you see U.S. Firearms now around here and there. And they made them in a variety of calibers and a variety of barrel lengths and so forth. That's about $4,500 gun now. So anyway, that's about the end of the single action discussion of what I can tell you I know about them. I know some other things. I can respond to specific questions, but I'm not an expert. What I know, I've found by talking to other collectors, and particularly my mentor, the late Jim Vulgaris, the old pirate, and reading books. There are a lot of books, and those books are generally low production and go out of print, and they cost a lot of money. You know, if you see a book you like, you better buy it, because it'll go out of print, and then you'll have to pay $300 for it. But anyway, that is the single action Colts and their history, the cap and ball, the conversions, going back to the Patterson Colt that Sam Walker and his people used briefly, and went into the Walker model, and then the Dragoons, which are the big ones, which were downsized 44 caliber, to this Army model, which was used to be a conversion later, and ended up as the 1873 model with various barrel lengths and various calibers. And that's an early one with a nice story. This is an early one. And I forgot to mention this one. You can send in a lot of money to Colt, and after a while you'll get a nicely typed on parchment paper letter, a factory letter. And these are prized for old ones because what they'll tell you, if they exist in the records, what they will tell you is where the pistol was shipped initially. And this one was initially shipped to a famous dealer in Mexico City, Wexel and DeGris. So it started out in Mexico, and it probably stayed in Mexico, and probably spent a lot of time in the Revolution till this Dorado, who was one of Villa's special troops, went with him into the night there at Columbus, New Mexico, and he got killed by the U.S. Army, probably by one of their machine guns. And he was probably burned up, and but the pistol was saved. Here it is. That's the story behind that one. Now, a little coda on the 41 caliber. They made the 41 caliber for a good while. This is a 1912 double action with Roper grips, which are collector's item in their own. And the 38 Special killed the 41 Colt. They should have done 41 Special, but they didn't. So 38 Special, the Cop caliber, and so forth is what killed this. They stopped making 41 ammo about 1940. And so if you want it today, you've got to hand load your own, which I do on occasion. Well, that is pretty much the Colt package. This is where they ended up. This is where essentially they are now with the new Frontier model. They have one that looks like the original, which is just their standard sights and so forth that they'll produce on special order, one at a time. And they're quite collectible too these days. But that's Colt.